Voters decide an unprecedented election in Colorado. For the first time in at least 100 years, there are 3 open congressional seats. Representatives Ken Buck and Doug Lamborn retired. Lauren Boebert switched from Congressional District 3 to Congressional District 4. The 4th congressional district and is the most Republican district in the state. Boebert, a 2-term U.S. representative and former restaurant owner, is running against Democrat Tricia Calvarisi, who is a Colorado native and worked for the AFL-CIO. In an effort to help you, the voters, make informed decisions, your political reporter Sean Boyd did in-depth interviews with both candidates.
Thanks for joining us. I'm political reporter Sean Boyd. I'm joined today by Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, who is running in Congressional District 4. Thanks for joining me.
Sean, it's wonderful to be here with you today, especially in person. We usually have these conversations over Zoom.
That's right. That's right. It is nice. I want to start out by talking about farming, which, of course, is a big industry in CD4. How would you address the undocumented farm workers as well as the H-2A visa program?
Sure. Well, if we are talking about our farmers, well, they need resources and they need the support to keep their farms going. We have many generational farms in Colorado, and the #1 resource that they need is water. So we often talk about a rural-urban divide when it comes to Colorado way of life in every area. But I've come to find that there is an east-west divide, especially when it comes to our water. We have the Continental Divide that splits our state, and 90% of our water flows west of the Continental Divide, and 90% of the population is east of the Continental Divide. And so there's this continuous struggle with who gets the water. So I'm advocating for more water storage projects in western Colorado as well as eastern Colorado. I've successfully delivered on many of those, beginning them, whether it's in Rangeley with the Wolf Creek Reservoir Project, or even my endangered species fish bill that is bipartisan and bicameral. And that just passed the House, and I expect that to be signed into law to preserve more water here. But if you're going to ask about the actual immigrants who are there on the farms, well, that is a discussion on immigration and, more importantly, our southern border. Our southern border is a mess. We have an invasion. There's at least 10.6 million illegal aliens who have come into our country, and many of them are expedited in their processes. We are seeing numbers upwards of 13,000 who are criminal aliens who are coming into our country, and that is hurting every American. We are funding them being present in our nation, in our state, and in our communities. And this is a problem. We have a legal process for those who want to come and help our farmers and our ranchers in the agriculture industry. We have visa processes. That's not what's happening at the southern border. I believe that many issues with our visa processes need to be addressed, but we have to start with securing the southern border before we go into reforming any sort of visa program that we offer. I understand that that work is valuable and necessary, but it's not supposed to be indentured servitude. Break our nation's laws, come into our country, work here, and then you can obtain some sort of residency or legal status.
Foreign markets and opening those up is a real concern of farmers as well. What can Congress do to help there? What can you do to help?
Well, currently we are importing more food than we are providing our American citizens, and even exporting. And that is a problem. We need energy security just as badly as we need, we need food security just as badly as we need energy security. This is a national security issue. And I want our farmers to produce the best, cleanest food that there is. But when we have programs that allow folks to different countries to ship in meat, and it's repackaged at our border, and then it's able to be labeled a product of the USA just because it's in a different package. Well, not only is that deceptive to the consumer in America, but it's also hurting our farmers and ranchers who are putting food on the table each and every day. I support our farmers and ranchers. I have advocated on so many different levels to get them the assistance that they need, to ensure that they have the support that they need, and also to deregulate in areas that make their jobs harder than they need to be.
Do you support the Farm Bill that passed out of the House Ag Committee, and are there any changes to it that you would fight for?
There's always changes that we could make, always revisions to be made. However, I have signed on to a letter to leadership with nearly 100 other Republicans saying when we returned back to D.C., this must be our priority. Our farmers have been begging for a farm bill. Our ranchers are asking for it. I just met with the Corn Growers Association in northern Colorado, and this is a question I'm asked all the time. When is the farm bill going to be passed? And we weren't even thinking it was going to come to the floor. And now I believe that there's enough momentum in the House that when we get back, it will pass. And maybe there will be some amendments that are made. I have some amendments already in the Farm Bill to help improve it. But I think we're off to a good start with it.
You know, we started out by talking about water. The Colorado River District is asking Congress for $55 million to help it buy the Shoshone water rights from Xcel. Do you support that, the $55 million coming from the federal government?
Well, we need to find a pay for it, that's for sure. And for those who don't follow the wonkiness of it, we need to ensure that this is not deficit spending, that we aren't borrowing more money from our adversaries and our adversary China and just adding more to our national debt. We are approaching $36 trillion in debt, and this is immoral and unsustainable. I want there to be an America to stand strong, to be sustainable, to stand for our allies. And if we continue this spending, we won't be here to do that. So I'm absolutely supportive of providing more water resources in Colorado. I have passed legislation to have $20 million come back to Colorado for major water and infrastructure projects, and this would be something very similar to that. I've also helped the city of Glenwood Springs with a $50 million grant for their South Bridge project. I had both the former mayor and current mayor thank me for my efforts on that. And so this is something that is very critical to our way of life. I started this out by saying how important water is. We produce so much water in Colorado. We are a head state, but unfortunately we over-allocate so much. And there are lower basin states who are taking advantage of the water contract that we have and taking too much. I would like to see those lower basin states have water storage projects so we're not seeing hundreds of billions of gallons of water dumped into the ocean every year in states like California. And I would also like us to have those projects here so we can store water, put it to beneficial use before it's sent downstream, and also avoid a lot of the seepage and evaporation that takes place, mainly the evaporation, by having it stored at a higher altitude at cooler temperatures.
So 18 House Republicans have signed onto a letter asking Speaker Mike Johnston to spare certain green energy tax credits from repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act. That law includes nearly $40 billion for forestry, rural development, and agriculture, including mitigation from the impacts of drought. Would you be open to preserving any part of that law?
I think there's many of that does need to be, much of that needs to be clawed back. There was so much in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that only added to the inflation that we are seeing. It is so hard for Americans to live under Bidenomics and the reckless spending that we've seen in Washington, D.C. And it's hard right now. It's hard to put gas in your vehicle. It's hard to buy groceries. I think the bill should have been called what it was. Even Joe Biden has admitted we should have titled the bill what it was. When the legislation came up, I looked at that and said, well, we have $1.2 trillion here and nothing is reducing inflation, and there's over $340 billion for the Green New Deal in these energy projects. So much of that needs to be brought back. I'm sure there are great things. There are grants that I have applied for to bring items to Colorado, funding for Colorado infrastructure and water and our forests and so much more. But that legislation was not the answer in total. We could have done a better job, and that's why I'm an advocate for single subject legislation.
Fossil fuels does receive tax credits. Do you think wind and solar should too? So
it's much less that fossil fuels receives in any kind of subsidy and tax credits. Okay, you know, I like tax credits. Let's move that way. But when we have the federal government choosing one industry over the other, propping one up above the other, that's when it becomes unfair. We need to allow the markets to decide. I'm fine with an all-of-the-above energy approach, but we can't do that on the backs of American taxpayers and have them fund this green new energy deal when it's not sustainable and it's not as efficient as many of our other energy productions are. We have the world's cleanest coal right here in Colorado. We produce natural gas. We can export our LNG to our allies throughout the world, literally exporting freedom. And also, we need to be doing more with hydropower, which I have legislation to support that, many of those projects. And we also need to be exploring more nuclear because that is the greenest energy that we can do. So I struggle when we are providing all of these subsidies for solar projects or wind projects and then know that there is not a plan to even fund or install transmission lines to connect this energy source to our grid. And that's where we are with much of this. Just like the broadband, where we have $42 billion in the infrastructure bill that was supposed to go towards broadband, and not one single user has been connected to that.
So you had mentioned the debt earlier, so I want to talk about budget priorities. Are you open to both revenue increases and spending cuts to reduce the nation's $36 trillion debt?
Yes. So I've always been for spending cuts. I have advocated for them on just about every piece of legislation that we've had. Even in the rules fight last January with Speaker McCarthy, we were saying that we need to go back to pre-COVID spending levels. We've yet to do that. We are still spending at pandemic levels. We were given an excuse of we need this funding because of a pandemic, and we're still spending that. We're not in a pandemic anymore. And it's really hard as a mother to know that my children have that debt on their heads, that my grandson, who's now 20 months old, was born with a $110,000 debt attached to him. And so I'm always for spending cuts. But I believe when we begin to produce our energy again and create good paying jobs here in America, create good clean air and water by our energy production, and lower inflation, well, then the economy will become strong again. I talk to small business owners, as I've been one over the years, and they are struggling right now. I want a strong economy for everyone, no matter what class you are in. And I want small business owners to be empowered to run their businesses successfully, to bless their employees with raises, and not struggle to just give them the bare minimum.
The 2017 tax cuts expire next year, as you know. What, if any, changes would you make to the current tax code?
Well, with our current tax code, there's many things that should be changed. There's certainly been talk about a flat tax or a consumption tax.
You support that?
There are pieces of it, yes. I believe that we can mold a lot of this together and make it more fair across the board. When we have some folks who are in a 30% or 40% tax bracket, that makes it very difficult to want to employ other people or to even make charitable contributions and just be generous rather than relying on the federal government for all of the benefits anyone would ever receive, or send them to a caseworker to fill out a form to get help. I want us to be able to thrive within our communities and help one another, rather than just asking Washington, D.C. for more money. So I'm proud of President Trump's tax cuts. And if anything, I think there need to be more tax cuts. I love his proposal, no tax on tips. Even Kamala Harris loves it so much that she adopted the no tax on tips in her platform. He's also said no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security and Medicare. This is huge. We have senior citizens who are on fixed incomes who have already paid taxes into the system their entire lives. And most of them, this is their only form of retirement. And now they are taxed once again when they're receiving what they've put into it.
What about a constitutional balanced budget amendment? Where are you at on that?
Sean, I have a constitutional balanced budget amendment that I have introduced. There are many of them that have been introduced, and unfortunately, we haven't had a strong enough majority in the House or throughout Congress and the White House to even see that go to committee or to the House floor. So we have Chairman Jody Arrington out of Texas, who is the chairman of the Budget Committee. He has put forward a wonderful budget. In fact, it's so good, I don't think he's allowed to talk about it anymore. But it actually makes sense. It makes appropriate cuts. He's gone through the line-by-line programmatic spending of the federal government to cut waste, fraud, and abuse and unnecessary programs and positions to work on addressing our debt. But I also believe that this Chairman Jody Arrington, does have the fortitude and the grit to put forward a constitutional balanced budget amendment. And I have no pride of ownership. It doesn't have to be mine. Congressman Thomas Massie out of Kentucky did say other than his, mine was the only one that he would co-sponsor. But I would love to see that added to our Constitution. Yes, ma'am.
You brought up Social Security and taxing it. What is your plan to maintain the solvency of Social Security and Medicare?
I think one of the biggest steps that we can take to maintain the solvency for Social Security and Medicare is stop giving so many benefits to folks who are here illegally. We are giving out hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to people who have broke our nation's laws and are living in our country. They get plane tickets and are flown in. They're receiving cell phones and gift cards and all sorts of medical benefits. We've seen in Denver, where Denver Health was at risk of going under, and Colorado taxpayers footed the bill to save them, to bail them out. $5 million was redirected by the state legislature to help Denver Health. $42 million was spent on potential illegal aliens' health care costs. And then we see in Denver alone another $74 million that has been spent on housing and food and other expenses. This is just one city in Colorado. And we have also seen the city of Denver cut their police force by 9% to make up the difference in some of those losses. So I believe that we need to put the American a citizen first, and that would be a huge step to saving this massive, the largest expense within the federal government.
There's been a lot of talk about this Project 2025. Do you support dismantling or scaling back any federal agencies?
Well, first of all, I have not read Project 2025. I am all Trump Force 47. President Trump has been very clear that that is his platform and his agenda, and it is one that I support, and I'm excited to work alongside of him with. Also, I absolutely support cutting agencies within the federal government or reducing them. There's many of them that we do need to scale back, examine, say, is this area of government wasteful? Is there fraud going on? Do we know where the funds are actually being spent when they're allocated? Is there abuse? Or is that agency unconstitutional or weaponized? There are so many things to look at. And again, that's why not only with single subject legislation I pushed for, but I also pushed for individual appropriations bills. We have 12 appropriations bills that fund the entire federal government. I don't want a minibus. I don't want an omnibus. I don't want a continuing resolution. I don't want to rubber stamp the funding of the entire federal government with one up or down vote. I want to go through each agency line by line and say, do we need this position? Do we need this agency? Is this agency overgrown? And really begin to scale back there. President Trump has said that the Department of Education is something that should be considered of being done away with, and it should go back to the states. And I believe it should go even further than that and back to our local communities and having the school boards have that full control. I'm certainly a supporter of school choice, and while we're paying those taxes for it, a voucher system that follows the student.
So let's talk about health care. Would you support legislation to make the expanded tax credits in the Affordable Care Act permanent?
So there's a lot there with healthcare. Again, I'm glad RFK Jr. is coming on the scenes to help with this. This is something that he has studied a lot and is wanting to make some massive reforms. I don't believe that Obamacare was the best answer for American citizens. I know that I wasn't able to keep my current insurance policy like I was promised, or my doctor, and my premiums went up. At the time we were small business owners, and we actually examined the fines that were originally imposed on not having insurance and just being self-pay. And it was cheaper to pay the fines than it was to have health care. Pay the fines and pay your own medical bill than actually have these premiums. But Obamacare was not the answer. I do agree with the promise that was made that if you have a pre-existing condition, then you should not be impacted. But I believe we need to have transparency within our healthcare system. Our doctors need to be empowered to actually treat people rather than just see them and medicate them and then go back to their office to spend the rest of their day coding. I think the system could be more simple and it could be simplified, but there needs to be a transparency to our healthcare system that doesn't happen right now. And I would like to see our healthcare be portable and not just attached to your current employer.
So a study by the Urban Institute found 11 to 18% of CD4 residents have medical debt. Would you support legislation that ensures that that debt doesn't impact their access to quality care?
I don't believe that the debt should ever prevent access to their health care providers and ensuring that they are taken care of. Again, I don't believe that we need more federal government intervention in our health care. I believe we need less of that. We need more health care savings accounts that really liberate citizens to take control of their health care needs. But also, I spend a lot of time with our veterans. And our veterans are struggling with VA services. We have a lot of great providers within the VA. We have great VA facilities, but unfortunately the system is broken, and there is some $40 or $60 billion a year that is allocated to the VA system, and it's a broken one. And I would encourage any American citizen who wants more of the federal government involved in their health care to speak with a veteran and ask them about the challenges that they face with government-run health care.
I'm going to talk about some workforce issues. What steps would you take to make sure inflation doesn't return and further lower the costs for consumers? And cost of living is a huge issue.
I don't think that the federal government should go into the private sector and continue to add more regulations and mandates on these small business owners who are trying to not only feed their own families, but provide for their employees who are there serving day in and day out as well.
Should the federal government fund child care programs like Head Start as a way of increasing the workforce?
I don't believe that that is the answer. If we have those good paying jobs here, we aren't looking to as many two income families. Many moms that I know who had husbands who worked in the oil and gas industry didn't have to work. And they were able to stay home with their children longer before they started school. And then they were forced to work because husband wasn't making the money that he once was. That income was no longer there, and it had to be supplemented. Now, of course, a woman should be able to work if she wants to. I certainly do. There's been many times where I was a stay-at-home mom and then said, you know, I really want to provide a resource and a service somewhere, and so went out and did that. But adding more subsidies and more debt isn't always the answer.
We've talked a lot about immigration. Do you support mass deportations, and what would that look like? How would you accomplish that?
Yes, I am for a mass deportation. Of course, you have to start somewhere, and starting with criminal aliens is an easy yes. But even further than that, in states like Colorado, where we have sanctuary policies, those need to be done away with. Maybe there's a role in the federal government to say, states, you don't get this funding if you have these policies, or maybe there's some sort of legislation that we can do there. But in Colorado, our ICE agents are unable to coordinate and communicate with our local governments and law enforcement, and that's a problem. So when we have at least 5 counties suing the state over these sanctuary policies because they aren't able to coordinate with ICE agents, that is something that needs to be addressed immediately, and that's one way that we can start removing criminal aliens from our country.
Let me ask you about abortion. Would you support a federal ban or any federal restrictions on abortion?
First of all, President Trump has made his policy very clear. And I think Americans know by now it's pretty much what the president is saying in his platform that is going to be signed into law. He's making it clear, he's campaigning, he's promising Americans. He has sent this issue back to the state with Roe v. Wade and the justices that he placed there. And so this is a state's issue. I am pro-life, and like many Americans, I believe that conception begins at life. I think it is very extreme to have abortions in the second and third trimester, even to the moment of birth, like we see here in Colorado. That is extreme. And that is not discussed enough. It's not highlighted enough that these children, these babies, don't have a voice and don't have an opportunity at life. I have supported legislation like the Born Alive Act. There are failed abortions in America where doctors are unable to provide care for a living baby that survived an abortion. And I have signed on and voted to pass legislation to save those children.
Lastly, just a few questions on foreign policy. What do you see as the long-term solution to Iran and North Korea's ballistic missile proliferation and nuclear capability?
Yes, well, when President Trump was in office, he was the first president of my lifetime and beyond that did not begin some sort of war or engagement in other countries. We had peace through strength. And unfortunately, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took office, immediately we had the horrible Afghanistan withdrawal, this surrender to the Taliban, and weakness was displayed to the world, that America was no longer strong. And Russia has taken advantage of that. Iran has taken advantage of that. They've been given $6 billion in the past. We're seeing what they're doing with that. Unfortunately, we had a supplemental aid this year that also gave $9 billion to Hamas, which is unacceptable, especially when that legislation came out of a House majority of Republicans. So we need peace through strength, and our adversaries need to know that we are serious, and our allies need to know that we stand with them no matter what.
Speaking of allies, what do you believe the role of the U.S. should be in achieving peace in the Middle East?
President Trump did have peace in the Middle East, and it was beautiful. And I believe that he can do that again.
Thank you. Is there anything I missed that you want to add real quick?
No, Sean, I just want to say this. This has been, I guess, yes. This has been an amazing experience. You know, the one thing that has been discussed a lot this year is my move from Western Colorado to Eastern Colorado. And I have to say, I've been telling folks that I meet with just how grateful I am for being so welcoming, kind to my family and I. Many people don't know my children, but I do. And I see the difference in them. I see the joy. They're engaged in sports and in our town that we're living in now, and they are so happy. And it's been wonderful to expand our capacity, reach new people, and also bridge that east-west divide when I've been trying to only bridge the rural-urban divide this whole time, and really just bring Colorado together for policies that work for all of us, for a strong economy, and for strong small businesses and opportunities.
Great. Thank you
very
much
much
for
Sean.
coming in.